1996 would turn out to be a pretty big and busy year for Humongous. First, they'd be purchased by GT Interactive, which was very fortunate for them as they needed the financing, and it didn't hurt that GT took a hands-off approach and allowed the company to continue running operations their way. The second was the launch of their subdivision Cave Dog Entertainment, and the debut of the Junior Arcade spin-off line, which the latter allowed them to put out more games in a year. Plus, it helped that the team really enjoyed making them. Lastly, but most important of all, it would be the debut of their third junior adventure series, Pajama Sam. The games center on Sam, a 6-year-old boy who is a huge fan of the comic superhero Pajama Man. Many times, he has a fear or problem that he must overcome. So, he dons his cape and becomes his hero persona, Pajama Sam, and ventures into new fantastical worlds, be it a weather factory or an island inhabited by sentient foods created by his own imagination, while also helping to fix other problems along his journeys. Basically, all of the essential duties for a young superhero to do. The idea for the project first began when Ron Gilbert thought up the idea for it. However, it was a rather vague one, since at that point, the title character didn't have a name yet. In fact, at the start of production, he was called, and I swear I'm not making this up, Fill in the Blanks Boy. So, after tossing around some names for a while, he ultimately settled on the Pumpkinhead Boy, which, by the way, had nothing to do with Halloween. He also originally didn't wear footy pajamas either. About a month into its development, the company's head of marketing told Gilbert they couldn't do it, and it would be for 2 reasons. One was because they were worried about provoking a lawsuit from Turner Broadcasting, as the name sounded too close to a character from The Wizard of Oz, Jack Pumpkinhead. The other concern they had with it was seasonality. Because the character had a pumpkin for a head, and the fact most people tend to associate that with autumn, especially Halloween, they would immediately assume it was a Halloween game and thus would only be available during that time period. At first, Gilbert balked at changing the character's name, but after giving it some thought, he concluded the head of marketing was right. So he brought the team together to pitch several different names. After going through several of them, including some notable names like Bedhead Ned and even Slumberjack, at the suggestion of artist Rafael Colonzo Jr., they finally settled with Pajama Sam. However, the whole name change story wouldn't be lost on them, as it would go on to be referenced in the first game.
Pumpkinhead Boy, a brief tragedy. Once upon a time, there was a boy who had a pumpkin for a head. But then his lawyers told him to lose the pumpkin because they feared a lawsuit by that big guy in Atlanta. And they were concerned about seasonality, so he lost the pumpkin and then he was blue. The end. I think I've heard that story before.
As for the game's overall story, it was virtually unchanged compared to the finished version, with Sam needing to reclaim his stuff so he can go and capture Darkness. But there were a few notable differences. First, instead of his mask, it was originally going to be his cape that would have been taken away. Next, the Land of Darkness was initially a more swampy, tree-infested, and gloomy landscape devoid of any life. But of course, that didn't end up being the case. Also, the customs inspector trees at the beginning were originally guardian trees. Finally, the river was going to have rapids in addition to the waterfalls and underground cavern, but it eventually got dropped. On a side note, Pajama Sam is notable for being the first ever human protagonist in a Humongous game. Yes, there was Kayla and her father at the beginning and end of Fatty Bear's birthday surprise and the ones in Let's Explore the Airport, but they weren't really fully rounded characters and the former only served as the driving force of Batgame's plot. Though one could say her character was more inferred than anything else. Another note, compared to Putt-Putt and Freddy Fish, Pajama Sam is a little more mature, more of which we'll get into later. Now, with all of that out of the way, it's time to explore the worlds of Sam's imagination. Beginning with no need to hide when it's dark outside. On his first night sleeping with the lights off, Sam is naturally scared to fall asleep, especially with the presence of darkness in his closet. So, he decides to enter his closet and gets transported to the land of darkness in order to capture him. Sounds easy enough, right? Well, it would have been, except that some trees end up confiscating his stuff and scattering them all over the land. So now, Sam has to go across the land of darkness and get them all back, while also meeting and helping new friends and overcoming various obstacles before he can capture darkness. This game truly started the series off on the right foot. It does a great job at setting up the conflict, establishing the world of the game, and its mechanics at the beginning. It also has a great amount of humorous moments sprinkled in.
Darkness may already have won a fabulous $1 million prize. Yeah, right.
Water in passages deep down where the rocks are hot gets heated up to the point where it would normally turn into steam, except it doesn't because of the pressure of all the other water on top of it.
Wow, I'm rich!
Internal Revenue Service. I'm gonna have to take some of that for taxes. You can keep this moldy piece of cheese.
As for the ending, it works as a nice subversion of the usual climactic scene, as it doesn't resort to using violence, and by presenting darkness as someone who doesn't want to cause trouble, but instead is a lonely person who just wants some friends to have fun with.
Oh dear, no one ever wants to come over and play fun games with me.
You like to play games?
Yes, but I never have anyone to play with. At night, when I come out, everybody's asleep.
You mean you don't have any friends?
Well, no.
The main conflict works on a personal level because it derives from a very relatable place. Let's be honest, who wasn't afraid of the dark at one point in their childhoods and wished they could just vanquish it? In a way, it's basically giving players the chance to live out that old childhood fantasy. Like many other Humongous games, the main gameplay has you going around the land of darkness collecting the needed items, and the team did a good job with changing up where Sam's 3 items are at, as well as what the player needs to get and do in order to retrieve them. Some of the paths are rather straightforward, while others require a bit of tricky problem and puzzle solving. The backgrounds and overall atmosphere really work well in capturing that dark and somewhat unsettling feeling, but also made sure it wasn't too dark so as not to frighten younger kids away, and they do have some fun with the locations. It also has a great amount of detail and nice touches, like having various random objects scattered about the land, as well as some areas resembling various rooms in Sam's house, and having the layout of Darkness's room mirror Sam's. For the character animation, while it's a bit rough around the edges, it's very smooth, and in some scenes like the dancing furniture one, can get really lively, and the designs, though again a little rough around the edges, work well in making it believable that these objects can come to life. On a side note, this game is where the team started experimenting with matching the mouth movements with the audio, but it's only during the cutscenes.
Don't try to butter me up. If you want to go across, you'll have to pay a toll.
How much is the toll?
1 pound of gold.
The rest of the time, it's like how it was with the early Freddy Fish and Putt-Putt games.
Declare? Well, no, I guess not.
The series is known for having optional mini side quests for the players to complete. In this one, you collect 10 pairs of different colored socks hidden across the land, but they're always hidden in different locations, and some are more well hidden than others. There's also a couple of fun and entertaining mini-games. The Brain Tickler is a fun trivia game that can actually get challenging, though it does throw in a few wildcard questions in there.
Let me try computer science.
All right, here is your question. What is the best computer programming language?
Only a geek would worry about something like that.
That's absolutely right!
Another good one is Cheese and Crackers. Sure, it's just a variant on tic-tac-toe, but it's still enjoyable regardless. Oh, and who could forget Nuggets, aka Remote Mining Terminal. Yeah, many of the later levels become tedious, but it does add to the challenge. Another fun side section is the Potion Mixing Lab, where one can mix up various concoctions, and they can have some humorous results. The characters here are certainly a creative bunch that also have some memorable personalities. One thing I'd like to add is that Sam himself is one of the most relatable characters Humongous ever made. He's just a regular kid with common fears and obsessions everyone had at some point in their lives and a strong imagination, while also avoiding many of the pitfalls that befell many other child characters. He may be young, but he knows what to do in a given situation, can be rather clever in figuring problems out, and works well with the stuff he's got. He's also got a good amount of wit and snark. However, what really elevated the character is that he's brought to life by the incomparable Pamela Adlon, who is notable for being the first big-name voice actor in the Humongous cast.
Hey, what a ripoff!
His interests include skydiving, channeling ancient spirits, and stamp collecting.
I don't collect stamps. You're making that up.
All in all, you've got yourself a solid game and a solid start to the series. Now, going back a bit to its development, there were many early ideas and designs the team went through before settling with what ended up in the final game. A good example, King's original design looked like he came straight out of Thomas the Tank Engine, with his face just placed on the front of a minecart. But naturally, it was reworked so that his face was incorporated into the cart instead. But if you watch carefully, you can spot his prototype version cruising along the tracks in certain shots. Next, Darkness's house initially started as a more standard-looking treehouse, and the Doors of Knowledge was originally the Door O Knowledge. Yeah, try to imagine the questions being given in a more straight-faced, serious manner instead of being more like a quiz show. Also, there were a good amount of unused elements that were removed and some hidden Easter eggs, which include special cursors for Sam's items and the blue potion bottle, animation of Sam using one of the oars to try to get his lunchbox out of the river, which is impossible to do since the oars aren't available on that path, some storyboard sketches involving a couple of clip points for the anti-gravity hall, a bit involving Sam's cape getting caught in the rotating door, Sam trying to use the oil can with the potion mixing bottle, which can't be done anyway, and some bit of animation of him trying to use the hammer on the chair without the nail. And he looks completely psychotic and about ready to break that chair to smithereens. Let's be thankful this didn't make it into the finished game, because this would have been easily taken out of context. On a much lighter note, in the kitchen, if the player does a few specific steps, the dumbwaiter will actually sing an extra verse.
Give it to me and I'll take it right up. The darkness where he'll gobble it up.
There's also an unused music cue that's not exactly known where it was meant to play, but it's most likely it would have been played at the boat docks. There's some interesting unused recording as well, like this bit for Otto.
I think it's safe now.
It was most likely meant to play in the geyser area and is possibly a remnant of when it was originally a timed puzzle. But it does play during the credits. The second was this exchange with King after the players already got a piece of gold and Sam remarks he'd rather have a gold nugget of cheese. But due to a scripting error, it doesn't play.
Hey, who wouldn't?
Finally, there were a couple of glitches that snuck in. One was an invisible sock that spawned on one of the trees near the well, and if the player picked it up and put it in the basket, it would cause the whole game to crash. Thankfully, it was fixed up in the 1999 revision. Speaking of which, the second glitch happens in said revision, where for some reason some of the well's dialogue is in Dutch.
Wouldn't you be even better off if you made 2 streams? Then you'd have twice as much water.
Uitbreiden, hè? Interessant idee.
Have you thought about my 2-stream idea yet?
Ik ben nog bezig met het voorontwerp. Het is een ingewikkelde affaire.
Now, this was because the developers used the Dutch dub as the base for the 1999 revision, and just forgot to switch the lines out. Well, on the flip side, maybe some kids picked up a little bit of Dutch because of this mistake. Lastly, for unused dialogue, there's only a handful of it. A few alternate takes for Sam, as well as a couple of unused lines, 4 alternate takes for Blink when Sam is coming out of the anti-gravity hall, and an exchange with Wink and Blink following the brain tickler.
Mom told me not to play with my food. What did that word mean that you said before? These are pretty heavy. I don't. I'd better hide the evidence. Oh, what's the use? That's the carrot who has my mask. I'm supposed to help him free the other carrots in the kitchen.
Hello, Mr. Grand Champion! Hello, Mr. Grand Champion! Hello, Mr. Grand Champion! Hello, Mr. Grand Champion!
Oh, hello, Mr. Grand Champion!
Yes, hello, Mr. Grand Champion!
Call me Sam.
All right, Sam it is. Hello, Sam!
The game was first shown at the 1996 E3 Expo, where it presumably went over well. And when Sam ventured into the land of darkness on August 6, 1996, he was greeted with a fond reception. The game was greatly acclaimed, with critics praising its plot, animation, gameplay, and the title character. And it went on to be a huge sales success, selling a lifetime total of nearly 3 million units. So, with that kind of success, a follow-up was a no-brainer. 2 years later, Sam would travel up through the clouds for his next adventure, Thunder and Lightning Aren't So Frightening. In here, while watching an episode of the Pajama Man show, Sam gets scared by the thunder and lightning of the ensuing thunderstorm, but he has had enough of it. So, he heads up to where thunder and lightning work, worldwide weather, in order to put a stop to it. When he gets there, however, he quickly sees that they're not at all what he expected them to be, and even picks up a little tidbit about why storms are important. Seems straightforward enough, but then he trips and accidentally hits a big red button that for some reason they have installed on the main console, and causes all of the weather around the world to go haywire. So, Sam agrees to help get all of the machines back in working order and restore the weather to normal. Thus, he goes all around the factory and does and gets what he needs in order to get the missing parts back. This is a great way to expand an in-game universe and is another solid game. The team did a great job expanding upon said in-game universe while keeping the core elements of what made the first game work, as well as continuing the theme of everything and everyone is not what one expected. In this case, showing that Thunder and Lightning themselves are factory employees and working to keep the weather in check. The plot, while similar to the first one, changes just enough things up to make it a different playing experience, with Sam needing to retrieve and return the 4 weather machine parts to their respective machines, and it does a great job at randomizing them. The ending does have a bit of tension with Mother Nature's arrival, though like several other games, players can take as long as they need and still get it done in time regardless of how long they actually take. There's also plenty of good humor for both kids and adults, and it can sometimes get rather clever. Seriously, they had to be clever to explain what inflation and Giffin's paradox is to kids in a way they would understand.
Do you know the answer to this?
Whoa, Giffin's paradox. That's where if you take a product that's not very good and you just make it cost more money, people will buy more of it. Pretty scary, huh?
That there exemplifies how much the team and the company as a whole respected kids' intelligence. The overall tone and atmosphere is the complete opposite of the Land of Darkness, as it's much brighter and more colorful, and the backgrounds do a great job at capturing the feel of an office work environment. The game, once more, has a good amount of relatability. I'm sure many of us as kids have been frightened by thunderstorms, especially ones with a lot of thunder and lightning, and adults will definitely get behind a lot of the office humor.
Hello, Complaints Department. Sheila speaking, even though I'm starting to get hoarse from having to talk on the phone all day. My next door neighbor plays his stereo so loud it's curdling the milk in my refrigerator, and all my cats are scared to come home. Thank you for calling the Complaints Department.
They also did a nice job on expanding Pajama Man, by showing that in universe, he wasn't just a comic book character, he's a whole franchise, while also cleverly having one path with the Snowflake Inspector draw parallels to the episode Sam was watching on television at the start of the game. For the gameplay, it got very interesting, as this is the first of 2 games in the series where players can select what game paths they want to play, or just let the game randomize like usual. This truly ups the variety and replayability. The side quest in this one is getting the pieces of Sam's jigsaw puzzle and putting the whole thing together. It's much simpler than the previous one, but it's still enjoyable to do. The team got very creative with the central location, playing around with the idea of a weather factory, how the various rooms and machines create all the types of weather, and the kind of jobs and positions it would have. There are also some nice callbacks to the first game, with the character portraits around the factory and the Land of Darkness being a part of one of the minigames. Speaking of, the game has 8 of them in total, some of which are just for fun, while others are essential for completing a path. One of the more notable minigames is a side one called the Weatherboard. It's basically Sorry, where the player has to get their 4 pieces back to their home before their opponents do. It can get rather monotonous, especially when it comes to the final spin or your pieces getting sent back to the start, but it's still plenty of fun. As for the animation, it did receive a quality boost, as the movements are much smoother and bouncier, and the character designs, particularly the worldwide weather employees, have some very creative looks, and also some fun personalities to boot. All told, as I've already said, you've got yourself another good game in the series. So, before we continue, I feel that I should briefly talk about Sockworks. I brought this up during the prologue, but that game does have a connection with this game, as the final bit at the end of the former leads into the events of the latter. That's pretty cool how the crew inserted it to connect the 2 games. Now, I'd be crazy if I didn't bring up that this game is home to another one of Humongous's well-known hidden Easter eggs. Just like the Eddie Eats Luther bit, it was done by an animator blowing off some steam. In this case, it was animator Giancarlo Volpe. Oh, but there's more. There was also an unfinished cutscene where Sam tries to sneak in by presenting Bill Gates an employee ID card. There was no animation done, but the dialogue was in place. It was probably best that it didn't make it, given that there's no way for the player to get back out of the gate anyway.
Will you let me in now?
No.
There's also a truckload of unused dialogue. Strap yourselves in, because this is gonna be a long haul. To start with, there was dialogue for the ending of the Pajama Man show scene at the beginning. It's not clear how they would have been used, but it was likely to have been either ambient noise or was part of a scrapped click point.
Are you all right, Milkman?
Yeah, but for a minute there, I thought I was going to have to change my name to Milkshake Man.
Ha 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 ha! Well, it looks like the world is safe once again.
Yes, but for how long?
With groups like Foul Weathermen around, can we ever truly be safe?
The road of virtue is paved with gravel. We superheroes must wear the shoes of commitment.
Nice analogy, Pajama Man.
Look! Quaker is getting away.
Somebody do something!
Why, this looks like a job for Pajama Man!
Next, there was a set of lines for Sam for the game's setup menu. Apparently, they forgot to record one for the apply button, so they tried to compensate by splicing together different voice clips. And you can hear why they ultimately chose to leave the lines out. But they can be reactivated by running this code.
Play this one. Play one of these. Let the computer choose. Apply.
Now, here are some very fascinating clips. See, during the game's development, the character of J. Langston III was originally named J. Langston Popsicle III, but he would sometimes be called just Popsicle. However, someone on the development team found out that Popsicle was a trademark of the Unilever supply chain, so they had to shorten his name. But there was just one problem. All of the dialogue had already been recorded, so to work around it, they carefully edited out the word or omitted several lines of dialogue. Boy, talk about dodging a bullet there.
I'm J. Langston Popsicle III. I'm J. Langston Popsicle III.
Poor Mr. Popsicle is swamped without you.
Popsicle? Mr. No Talent Take All the Credit Employee of the Month every month. Popsicle can go melt. For all I care, it'll even be nice to see that insensitive boob J. Langston Popsicle.
Jersey Langston Popsicle III. Birth date 8/18. Favorite food, sushi. Favorite color, periwinkle. I think he and Mr. Popsicle are gonna get along just fine now.
There's a set of generic lines that were meant as stand-ins for when Sam fixed the weather machines.
You fixed a machine.
That's right, I sure did.
Why is the weather such a mess? Everything's gone crazy.
I'll fix the last machine.
One for when Sam completes the locker puzzle while having an apple or apple core in the inventory, which wouldn't have worked given players have to give George someone an apple in order to get the combination.
I really thought I was gonna need this to open the lock.
One for when the player tries to give George someone a second apple, which would have been impossible since the player can only get one apple.
He seems happy with the one he has already.
An unused lead-in for when Sam suggests it would be better to use a computer to check all of the snowflakes.
I was thinking...
Yes?
An alternate take for Sam and the Snowflake Inspector about the Dust Devil.
What is this thing anyway?
It's a dust devil! Like a little bitty tornado.
And one for the chairman of the board suggesting the washroom's new color.
Topaz?
When Sam entered Worldwide Weather on October 2nd, 1998, he got the entire situation under control. The game was another great sales success, and critics were once more giving it good praise, though not as much as the first game, saying that they enjoyed the adventure and characters, while also giving praise for the animation, the challenging puzzles, and its underlying message. Moving ahead another 2 years, Sam would be taken to another exotic location in You Are What You Eat From Your Head to Your Feet. In this one, after eating a lot of cookies for some box tops, and a few of them somehow escaping to the pantry, Sam ends up getting taken to the island of Mop Top, where he quickly stumbles into a political party. Emphasis on party. Only to then get thrown in jail for not wanting to spoil his dinner. Yeah, seriously.
It's almost my dinner time and I wouldn't want to spoil it. My mom made all that broccoli? Turtle!
Throw him in jail.
Yeah!
Jail!
Jail!
After getting himself and his new friend Florette out of jail, he goes to the food pyramid and soon learns from Carrot that they are currently on the brink of war with the Sweets. That is, unless they can get the peace conference underway. The only problem? Not all of the delegates have arrived yet. Thus, Pajama Sam has to help get the remaining delegates to the conference so they can settle their differences and make peace. Now, before I get into the plot and gameplay, let me just say this right out of the gate. This game's premise is really clever. I mean, taking the typical moral about good and balanced eating and mixing it with a political theme. In many other animated projects, whenever one tries adding in a political theme or undertone, it can be rather hit or miss, since it depends on how it's integrated and executed. In the case of Pajama Sam 3, the Humongous team didn't just make it work, they did it in a way that made sense. It's not that overly political, and it really just serves as the springboard for the main conflict, which it does pretty well. The game did a great job at taking advantage of and having fun with its central location, showing how everything functions, setting up the main conflict, and what has to be done. The plot is definitely a good one, since, again, not a whole lot of kids' games would execute the moral in this manner, and it actually makes the game more mature. Unlike the first two games, the relatability doesn't come from a childhood fear, but rather another common scenario, having too many sweets. I mean, we've all eaten a lot of sweets on some days and needed to balance it out with healthier meals, so it's a somewhat clever way of getting it across. Sam's speech at the end, though a bit cheesy, is quite poignant, and does a great job at not talking down to kids. Also, it makes one wish many actual peace conferences went over as well as this one did.
All the best things to eat are made by different kinds of food working together. And that's what you should all be doing. Instead of fighting, you can work together to create new and better things.
The gameplay once more has you rescuing important characters and giving different ways to rescue them, as this is the second game that lets players select which paths they want to do. This time, however, the stakes here are higher than they were in the first two games. I mean, there's a looming threat of war going on. That right there should say enough, despite said war never actually happening. The collectibles this time around are the box tops. If one gets all 20, they will get the Pajama Man action figure Sam was talking about at the beginning. The catch though is that the first two are in the two areas you can't backtrack to, and if one doesn't get them, it renders it impossible to get them all in one playthrough, which helps add to the replayability. The central location, the Isle of Mop Top, is one of the most creative locations the series has done yet, and the crew truly got imaginative with the areas, having each of them reflect a different part of the body, though some of the names are a bit on the nose, and what roles the food characters play and how it functions. Speaking of, the new characters are very charming, colorful, fun, and memorable, and it's always good seeing Carrot make another return in a scenario that fits him perfectly. It's also got a great amount of humorous moments.
What? I said guard, not gourd! Great goulash!
Albus used to ask me, what's small and red and goes 60 miles an hour? Anyone? Huh? It's a strawberry driving a car.
If there are some criticisms with the game, it would have to be with the pacing. Now, I'm not talking about how long it takes to rescue each delegate. That's all fine. I mean some of the timed puzzles and minigames, shelf scramble, and the bean counting and sorting machine to be more specific. Don't get me wrong, they are both fun to play and are necessary for finishing one game path, but they become unintentionally tedious, since it'll sometimes take a long while to finish either one, but they don't detract from the game too much. Then there's the ski minigame. It's not terrible at all, but it's too simplistic, as all you do is pick which route to go upon coming to a junction. It feels like a watered-down version of the race from Putt-Putt Enters the Race. I will say though, the decision to have it played and presented from a first-person perspective was a pretty cool touch. Also, it is a bit dated, as the food pyramid has long since been supplanted as the standard nutritional guideline. Other than those bits, this is another solid entry in the series. Alright, you've waited long enough for this, so let's get this obvious little bit out of the way.
Look, a sweet potato!
Where is that? I don't see anybody.
Oh, hello, sir.
Welcome to the A complex, Mr.
Gourd. I'm good.
Mr. Gourd. Very good.
Yes, it's a nod to the original Pumpkinhead Boy, which once again exemplifies the care the Humongous crew had when putting the games together. Not too many unused scenes in this one, but there is one fascinating Easter egg. At one point, the Sweet Troopers were sporting riot gear. What was up with that, you may be asking? Well, this was a reference to the Seattle WTO protests that had occurred during the game's production. Like in the last game, there is a plethora of unused dialogue, consisting of...
Ugh, licorice. Blech. Licorice. Licorice again? Rats, more licorice. Yuck. Licorice. Yikes. I'm not putting my hand near that again. I can't use that here. I'm not going anywhere near them.
Okay, Florette's finally...
Well, they better get here soon, or you know what that means. Exactly.
Let's do some more sailing, Sprinkle. Colorful. I don't want to interrupt his counting.
All right.
I've already found bean 47. It looks like a turtle, but I think it's a walnut. They're like little stepping stones. That one's pretty far away. I don't think I can jump that far. I'll never make it. That's too far for me to jump. I'm Sam. These hats are actually kind of nice. Yeah, all we've got to do now is use it to find bean number 47.
Well, all we've got to do now is to use the bean counting machine to number the beans at least as far as 47. and we're home free. Oh, I can't tell you how happy I am that the bean counting machine is finally put together. I'm sure bean number 47 will be pleased.
I think I looked better in the last one. I doubt if hitting it harder will make it work any better. I don't want to break the button, I guess. Plungers work better on drains and stuff. I need to click on those lifts to go up and down. I've got to click on the lift to ride it. These shapes look like the ones on the map. They show the route that the plumber took when he went skiing. That might work, but I'd probably better use real skis.
She is not the cream puff, she is the pastry. How little you know, my friend. How little you know, my friend.
Hooray!
One for all, and all for one.
And finally, a set of separate individual recordings of each of the delegates chanting and some original whole recordings. Last but not least, there are 4 unused music cues, consisting of a bass-driven track, a track similar to the one used in the Heart Junction, an isolated version of the cue used as the second half of the ending music, a surf remix of the main theme that would later be used in games to play on any day, and a guitar-based piece. When the peace conference finally got underway on February 1st, 2000, it managed to go over better than expected. Critics were giving the game great praise for its humor, replayability, Sam's optimistic outlook, and for respecting the audience's intelligence, and even said that it was impressively complex. So with all that, surprise, surprise, it went on to become another sales success. A year later, Sam would have a more unique entry with games to play on any day. There's really not a whole lot to say about it. It's just a minigame compilation in the same veins as the activity packs and the junior arcades. So why bring it up at all? Couple of reasons. See, until its release on Steam, this was the rarest Humongous entertainment game out there. Because it had such a very limited run, it immediately fell into obscurity. So for a long time, it was hard to find a physical copy. The game would also mark the final time Pamela Adlon would reprise Sam, which we'll get into later. All that being said, this is a good minigame set, with some very fun and occasionally challenging ones. It's also neat seeing the various Pajama Sam twists on many of these classic board games, like 4 Cheese Pizza is a simplified take on Trivial Pursuit, Rock Pile is essentially Mancala, Goody Goody Gumdrops is Reversey, and of course, you knew they'd bring back cheese and crackers for this game. There's not a whole lot of unused elements for this one, it's mostly just unused responses for games that ended in a tie, alternate takes, and unused lines for Florette in Jumping Beans, and one for Darkness in Cheese and Crackers. One interesting note about it. The game was originally titled Pajama Sam's Games to Play on a Rainy Day, but marketing didn't like it and had it changed to its final title. I guess they thought the original title sounded too depressing and wanted it to sound more appealing to all players, even though the former was fitting given it does take place on a rainy day. Another notable bit, if you listen carefully, Sam in this one has a bit of a drawl, and this is also the first Humongous game to have the audio rendered in 22 kHz as opposed to 11 kHz. They even rendered the music from 3 in it, and it sounds really good.
Now, where are those board games? I think they're in this closet. Rats! My favorite game is on the top shelf!
2 years later, Sam would be heading off to the mall for his last adventure in Life is Rough When You Lose Your Stuff. In here, Sam hears that Pajama Man will be at the mall signing autographs for one day, and he naturally gets all excited about it. So, he goes to his room to get his favorite comic book for him to sign, the rare first issue of Pajama Man. However, it ends up getting pulled down into the land of junk. Upon arriving, Sam quickly learns it was taken to the Grubby Corners Mall so it could be signed by Dr. Grime. But there's one catch. The mall has a strict dress code and he can only go in if he has a shirt, socks, and shoes. Thus, Sam needs to go across the land of junk, get the needed clothes so he can get into the mall and retrieve his comic book before Dr. Grime touches it and makes it filthy forever. At this moment, you're probably thinking, this sounds a lot like the plots of Pajama Sam's Lost and Found and Freddy Fish 4. While they are similar to an extent, Life is Rough does play it out differently, with Sam needing to get back one item instead of a whole bunch of them, and it doesn't require Sam to disguise himself, but instead get mistaken for someone else. The overall plot and scenario is a good fit for a Pajama Sam game, as it's one you would expect the series to do at some point, because it's two relatable childhood things combined. I mean, as kids, it's always a dream getting to meet your all-time favorite actors or characters in person and asking for their autographs. Plus, losing your favorite and most treasured possession is definitely something everyone, especially collectors, can attest to. However, as much relatability and potential the game has, in execution, it unfortunately comes out as easily the worst entry of the entire series. To start with, the plot itself is far too simple with not too much happening, and as a result, it just kind of meanders about until the player gets a new item or reaches the next area. It doesn't help either that the characters here are very one-note and don't have any interesting personalities. Not to mention some really weak humor.
Some days it rains. Them days is nice too. I have to put on my wrapper then, but rain is nice.
Ah, the peanut. The misunderstood nut.
The gameplay here feels very watered down in contrast with the first three, as it only follows one path to get each article of clothing, and it has no interchangeability apart from where the jar is at. Sure, one can change up the order they do them in, but it doesn't change the fact it's less replayable than the others. There's also some odd sequencing, like the bishop won't poke holes in the jar until after you try to catch the fireflies first, or the happy farmer not showing up until after you first visit Grubby Corners. For comparison, in the first game, one can get the wooden board before they go and meet Otto. Also, for whatever reason, it has a musical number. Now, on its own, it's not a bad song, but it feels out of place and the moment didn't necessarily call for one. Plus, there aren't any other numbers in the whole game, making it even more pointless. The minigames and puzzles in here are a lot simpler and easier than before, and again, don't have much replayability. Seriously, the scaling drawers and clearing trash minigames are so easy, they're not worth playing again. Plus, the latter is just a copy of Bejeweled. The Land of Junk is an interesting location, as it does a good job at reflecting Sam's messy room, with the various stuff scattered about the world, and having bits of carpeting popping out of the ground is a nice detail. But the overall aesthetic is just emulating the Land of Darkness, right down to having it being set in a nighttime environment. Not sure why they decided to have this land in a nighttime setting. Also, it oddly feels smaller than the aforementioned did. The collectibles this time around are the Pajama Man trading cards, but even the side quest feels watered down. Not to say that the cards themselves are bad or anything, they are well done and are definitely one of the better aspects of the game. The problem is, they're on every screen of the game except for at the beginning and the dressing room. Sure, it changes up what card is in what location, but even still, it takes away a lot of the fun and challenge of trying to find them. This could have easily been remedied by also changing up what cards you find. Also, the music cue for it can get really tiresome very fast. The character animation in here really took a big downgrade. It's not as bouncy and lively as it was before, and you can tell where they cut a lot of corners. In fact, there are spots like this where you can see it switching from the new animations to the old ones and vice versa. It doesn't help either that the clip points aren't as fun and imaginative as they were before. Now, I know I'm being very hard on this game, but like with Pep's birthday surprise, the crew can't be blamed too much for the final result, as they were trying to do their best with the budget and resources they had. However, what I just said there was only the tip of the iceberg. What exactly do I mean by that? Well, if you'll recall back in the prologue, I talked about how when GT Interactive became Infogrames Inc., Humongous was subjected to a lot more executive interference and resistance. But what I didn't elaborate on was just how bad said interference and resistance was making things for them. See, by this time, Infogrames Inc., now Atari Inc., decided they didn't want to continue making any more of the adventure games, since it's no secret that making 2D animated games was anything but cheap. Yes, Humongous' games were still very popular with kids, parents, and critics, but the games themselves, while still selling well, only ever turned in small profits, but they added up over time. However, Atari Inc. wasn't interested in making games that only made small profits. Instead, they wanted big games that would, in turn, make huge profits, which was probably the main reason why Backyard Sports was allowed to continue. The problem with that was, doing those kinds of games were a huge risk. By contrast, when they were under GT Interactive, as I said at the start, GT had a more laissez-faire approach and allowed Humongous to still run operations their way. However, Atari Inc. did eventually allow the team to make more of them, but on one condition. They'd let them do it if they kept the costs on them down. So, they asked the crew to plan them out as well as present how much it was going to take, which they acquiesced to. But the team strongly advised against making them, because they felt they cut too many corners, but Atari Inc. said to make them anyway. So the crew tried to do the best they could, as they really loved the characters and wanted them to turn out good, but it proved to not be easy. Why? Well, for starters, there was almost no storyboarding phase, which was where a good amount of the creativity and editing was done. They also had to outsource a good amount of the art to another company, which proved to be very hard on the artists, who were also doing all of the keyframing that were then given over, and they'd get back animations that were charitably described as subpar. Not to mention, they had to fix up the incoming art and manage the outsourcing companies in addition to their own work. As you can imagine, because of their tireless devotion, they were put in a time crunch and had to work unpaid overtime, which ended up leaving them with not enough time to put in more creativity. Now, some of you may be asking, okay, that explains why the games look so much cheaper, but why did they switch to using a new game engine instead of sticking with the Scum engine for this and Pep's birthday surprise like before? Well, for that, you once again have Atari Inc. to thank for that. They insisted that the crew switch from using the Scum engine to using the industry standard technology to make the games. As a result, they were written in a new game engine called the Python, later dubbed the Yaga. Now granted, the team would have had to upgrade the game engine anyway, since by 2003, the Scum engine had become outdated. Heck, LucasArts stopped using it back in 1997. But if they had it their way, they would have taken the time to first learn the ins and outs of what it could do. But that didn't happen. Because they were starting from scratch with a new engine, the crew was literally figuring out how to use it as they were making the games. This meant there were elements they didn't have time to implement. This is why, for instance, one couldn't completely change Putt-Putt's color in Pep's birthday surprise. It was both really stressful and distressing, down to the point where the team felt they weren't reaching the quality they had set for themselves. It's pretty sad to hear all of this happen. No games production or crew deserves to go through that kind of stressful pressure. So, getting back to the game, like with Pep's birthday surprise, due to Humongous' then current financial state and working with a smaller budget, they weren't able to get Pamela Adlon back again, so Sam was recast to Alicia Ferguson, who, like Michelle Thorson before, I'm certain gave it her best shot, but her performance was really lackluster, and it sounded like she was trying too hard to sound like a young boy. However, this wouldn't be the first time Adlon didn't come back to reprise the role. That honor would actually go to Pajama Sam's Sockworks. Adlon, at the time the game was in production, was busy off doing other projects, including but not limited to Pepper Ann, Recess, and especially King of the Hill. So, for Sockworks, they brought on another veteran voice actress to fill in for her, E.G. Daly, and she actually did a great job playing the character.
I can't sleep with darkness hanging around in my closet. I'm gonna have to capture him. This is a job for Pajama Sam.
Aha! All right, cookies. Your dinner spoiling days are over. Pajama Sam is on his way.
That was a great dream. But I better get to work on those socks now. Mom said to have them done before school. Hey, it's snowing like crazy out there. Yes, school will be closed for sure.
Oh, well, why don't you come along with me? Maybe I can help get you and the other sock back together.
Do you really mean that?
Pajama Sam is on the job.
Are we there yet?
We're here! Inside the Grubby Corners Mall.
Now, what the final game lacks in content and replayability, it certainly makes up for with the amount of unused elements. First off, there were a few areas that were planned but ultimately got cut out of the final game. These include an interior area of the aquarium, a lamp court area, and a side tabletop, which would have also included a new character, the Roman soldier, that would have been linked with the aquarium and could be reached by jumping off the cliff where the fireflies were, which in the final game takes you directly to the aquarium instead, and a separate area for the chest bleachers. There are also other interesting unused elements and early ideas, like Dr. Grime was originally named Dr. Filth, and the Peanuts were to sometimes appear in the Dust Bunny Corral, which would have helped add to the game's replayability. For unused music, there's a cue intended for the aquarium's interior that didn't make it due to that area getting cut out. Oh, and while I'm still on about music, you know the song the Soiled Sock sang at the beginning? Well, there was going to be a reprise of it for when the two socks are happily reunited. It was written, but was cut out of the final game, making it even weirder the first song was kept in. As for unused dialogue, there were some early recordings for the Soiled Sock that suggest the character was originally female.
Hi, Sam. Well, now that you mention it, no, it's a sad situation. I suppose the best way to explain it is this. Now do you understand my position? Right. Now you're starting to think like a sock.
And some from Grandma's Sweater about losing her contact lens, which was part of an alternate game path where you would have had to use a static balloon in order to find them that was cut due to time constraints.
Tarnation, my contact lens. Did you see where it went? Be really careful where you step. If you hear a crunching sound, that's bad.
When Sam hit the Grubby Corners Mall on August 19, 2003, along with Putt-Putt, Pep's birthday surprise, it was anything but a pleasant sight. With critics, they generally gave it good reviews, mostly calling it a basic and fun children's educational game. When it came to the fans though, they absolutely loathed it, decrying it for its lackluster adventure, lower effort, and Ferguson's performance as Sam. Some have even went as far as to call it not just the worst Pajama Sam game, but also one of, if not the worst game Humongous ever made. So it should go without saying that it did not sell very well. After that, the games coasted along with reissues for the rest of the aughts, until their eventual releases on Steam, the iOS, Switch, and the App Store. There were a couple of ports prior to that were attempted. Of course, there's the Wii port, which for a wide variety of reasons did not work well at all. And there is one other fascinating port release the series ever got, the PS1 release of Pajama Sam 3. Yes, you heard it right. This was released on the original PlayStation in 2001. What's interesting about it is, they didn't just take the PC Mac version and put it on a PlayStation disc. The whole port was completely built from the ground up. The end result? Well, it left a lot to be desired. Many cutscenes and music were removed, and there's a lot of load times. Needless to say, it wasn't very good. Moving on to a more positive note, the series would win various awards, like an All-Star Award, a Silver Honor Parents' Choice Award, and 2 Review Corners Award of Excellence. Pajama Sam is the most endearing series of the Junior Adventures, thanks to its relatable title character, imaginative worlds and scenarios, memorable characters, and humor even adults will get into. Next time, we journey from the world of imagination to the world of espionage, as we'll go on world-saving missions with the top spy agent.